or we can have an interactive session. And I think I would value the interactive session. So I will touch base on some of the issuing authorities and when permits are required, but I would value your input in terms of questions that you might have that would aid you in either finding out which permit would be application would be relevant to you and what processes we have put in place to ensure that your turnaround times and access to the departments are facilitated quicker. So so what I'm saying is that please raise your hand. Biosha, would you mind just having a look at the chat area? Use the chat, put questions there, stop me mid-sentence, and I will be happy to engage with you on a more interactive basis. Excuse me. So, of course, the relevant issuing authorities. So, if you're doing research or if you're involved in a teaching protocol, or if you're doing testing, and you're using any plants or animals or human samples, you would need to obtain a permit, especially if you are looking into exporting these materials out of the country or bringing material into the country. So the Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Department focuses primarily on samples from animals, and their Section 20, for instance, is one of those very contentious permit or or applications that you have to lodge with the department. SAPRA, if you are using any scheduled drugs or medicine that involves in your research proposal, and that would be like marijuana, methamphetamines, or any of those. If you need access to those drugs, you would need to get hold of SAPRA for a permit. Then Department of Health, if you are sending out of the country or exporting any human samples, you would need to obtain a permit, a export permit from the department. If you are importing samples, then you would require an import permit. Cape Nature is the conservation agency or the conservation um, authority within the Western Cape, yes, that deals with access to the various nature conservation areas. If you are involved in any plant or animal work where you have to access these sites, you would need to obtain permission from Cape Nature. Then the South African Council for the Non-Proliferation of Weapons of Mass Destruction. If you work with any viruses, bacteria, fungi, and or chemicals that is listed on this council's list of material that require their pre-approval, you would need to register on their website and obtain their permission. So, if we start with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, there is the ACT, the National Environmental Management and Biodiversity Act, that deals specifically with bioprospecting, access and benefit sharing, but it also deals with threatened or protected species and species that form part of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. We abbreviate that with CITES. Excuse me. And if your work involve any of these sections of the Act, then you would need the required permit. So let's start with the South African or the BAPS regulations or the South Africa's Bioprospecting Access and Benefit Sharing Regulatory Framework. So in South Africa, if you are using any indigenous fauna or flora or as indigenous or traditional knowledge associated with any of the animals or plants that are found in the borders of South Africa, you need a permit from the department. So, and more so, so there is two processes here. So if your research is exploratory in nature, if you are just looking at rooibos and trying to find out what is in rooibos, and that has health benefits, etc., without the intention to commercialize or to develop a product that you can sell at a pharmacy, then you would just need to inform the minister that you are doing discovery work. And that's a very fairly easy process. I am the institutional person that signs off on this application. You send the completed application to me, I sign, we submit, and government says we acknowledge that you're working on this indigenous biological resource of the country. If you come at a point where you can commercialize something, please submit a bioprospecting permit application. So 5 years down the line, you find that you can make a cream that you can put on your face from this rooibos extract that you've been working with. We now have to apply for a bioprospecting permit, where we now unpack how this this whole the commercialization of this product will happen. What are the benefits that you are sharing with a local community from which you have most likely tapped into their traditional knowledge, etc. This takes a long time. Um, we have last year been successful in negotiating or applying for a permit and having all our ducks in a row, that it took only 3 months. Previous years, it took a long time. It took the one permit. We got the permit, and then the licensing and things didn't work out. So the permit was then not valid or not necessary anymore, because everything fell through. Because it takes about 3 years for that process to effectively come to an end if you don't have your ducks in a row. But if you contact us in this office, we will do everything in our um, power to assist you, so that when you submit to government, that everything is ready and in place. Then if you're working with any elephants, lions, African buffalo, rhinoceros, cheetahs, and all animals that are threatened or protected, you would require a TOPS permit. And this TOPS permit would allow you to be in possession of the animal sample, whether it's its blood or physical biopsy samples, the transportation of those samples, and then the storage within your laboratory in terms of address where this samples will end up. If you are sending these out, you would need an export permit associated or attached to the TOPS permit as well. Then CITES, usually universities or yeah, our researchers don't trade in the use of these endangered species, but sometimes there is the need for an institution to be registered as a scientific institution, which Stellenbosch University is under the CITES program. And for instance, if you are sharing samples with the Smithsonian in America, both institutions are registered as scientific institutions under the convention. It makes just things easier sharing these samples. Then again to the top threatened or endangered species. So I was fortunate enough to negotiate with the department that Stellenbosch University, as an institution, as a registered scientific institution, will apply for a TOPS permit for the university. And all the researchers working on these animals will then be listed under this permit for the various activities that they want to do. So the permit, and we have a standing permit that is valid for about a maximum of 5 years, with the condition that we have to provide progress reports annually, is in the university's name, and researchers are added through amendments on this permit. And this makes things just so much easier, as opposed to various people on the university having TOPS permits and various site visits and audit inspections, etc. So if you are thinking of working on any of these endangered species or threatened species or protected species, please contact me so that we can add you to this already existing standing permit for the university. I touched on the use of indigenous knowledge earlier on. So there is a act that was promulgated in 2019 that speaks to the protection, promotion, and the development of indigenous knowledge within the borders of South Africa. And as from the name, it aims to protect, it aims to promote, develop, and manage these various indigenous knowledge systems to ensure that these are not inappropriately used or accessed without proper benefit sharing. So this office that deals with this is fairly young, and we are looking anxiously on communication from them in terms of how they will put to us how they will manage the use of indigenous knowledge within the country. Obviously, this has an impact on people within botany or zoology or medicinal plant research that from time to time access indigenous knowledge from communities, and how this would need to be aligned with this newly promulgated act. Then, and I won't dwell on this, there is the Animal Diseases Act, and specifically Section 20 of the Act that puts limitations on the investigation or experimentation using animal products, specifically products that have the ability to cause disease, outbreaks, etc. So any investigation or experiment or research with any vaccine, serum, toxin, antitoxin, antigen, or biological product need to, from an animal, of course, need to get Section 20 permission from the government. From this relevant department. There are a few issues, there are a few concerns that we've had in terms of the potential overreach from this department on animal investigation or animal research. But the important message here is that if you're working with if your work involve any of the activities as listed here, you would need to get hold of the department. If you're unsure, you are more than welcome to reach out to us, and we will put you in contact with the correct person at the department to assist you. Then, if you are working with genetically modified organisms, Regulation 4 of the GMO Act of 1997 requires your facility to be registered with the department. And I can confidently say that most of our facilities that do have GMO material in their possession are indeed registered with under this act, under Regulation 4. And if you are new to the university or if you're unaware of this, again, please reach out to us. We have on our Biosafety Committee that deals with GMO aspects, have Biosafety South Africa, Dr. Reni Groenewald, who is the CEO on our committee, and he's quite helpful in terms of advising our researchers on when and assisting them with the application to the department to register their facility. So please don't suffer in silence. Reach out to us, and we will see how we can assist you. Do we have any questions thus far, or shall I continue? If not, again, you are happy to stop me mid-sentence. Then those that are doing animal work with regard to laboratory animals or any animal work where you are doing physical procedures on animal should know about Section 23 authorization by the Veterinary and Paraveterinary, the South African Veterinary Council, that's the name. The Act is the Veterinary and Paraveterinary Professions Act. So the only people in the country that are allowed to do veterinary procedures on animals are registered, SAVC registered veterinarians and or SAVC registered paraveterinarians. So many of our researchers are not qualified as veterinarians or paraveterinarians, and therefore according to the Act, they should not perform any veterinary professions on animals. But the Act makes a provision in Section 23 that authorizes non-veterinary or paraveterinary professions to, for research purposes, conduct specific animal or specific procedures on animals. So you submit an application to the council, they assess your application, and in that application must be evidence that a veterinarian has trained you in this specific procedure. And once the vet is happy with that, submits evidence of that confirmation, and then you are authorized only in the one or two procedures that you would need to perform as part of your research protocol. So there are a few of these categories that you can be authorized in. I won't go through all of them. Category A is very minor, minimally invasive procedure, and category F is for those persons who perform on a professional or employment level functions of a veterinarian or a laboratory animal technologist, etc. So our researchers would most likely fall in between A and D, as we have veterinarians, specifically for the faculties of medicine, health sciences, and the faculty of science, Dr. S.D. Spies, and Dr. Benny Groenewald for the Faculty of Agri-Science, should you need to get authorization for a specific procedure as part of your research protocol. Then, as I said, the Department of Health, under the Health Act of 2003, any import or export of human tissue, blood products, cultured cells, gametes, stem cells, or embryos, fetal tissue, or any of those cannot enter or leave the country without a permit. Many moons back, it was most likely acceptable to put whatever in an envelope and wrap it, put it in a box, and then just send it through the post office. We have moved away from such thinking, colleagues. We now follow the proper procedures to ensure, number one, that sending of the samples is safe, and number two, that it actually reaches where it should go, and that your research can actually take place. So there are a few things to consider here. So if you want to export human tissue, you need an application form that you need to complete, but you also need a material transfer agreement, which puts the conditions, terms and conditions under which this exchange is taking place. And that is dealt with by our research contract office within the Division for Research Development. Secondly, you would need evidence of ethics approval for on how you obtained the human samples. This package need to be submitted in one email or application so that the department can consider. So if you don't have evidence of ethics approval, or your MTA is not ready yet, it makes it very difficult to submit to the department for an export permit. For import, the same. You would need to have a export permit from the country that you're sending it, and then an import permit for South Africa. And if you're exporting from South Africa, you need to ensure that your counterpart or your collaborator on the other side who's receiving the samples have a proper import permit, because sometimes these samples get stuck at ports because the associated import permit is not ready on the other side, and then there's a huge loss of the samples if they are not returned. So please reach out to us so that we can discuss your application prior to you submitting it to the department. We also have all the forms that you would need, and we can then deal with it. Biosha, I see your hand. Let me just, do we have a question or what is happening?
Hi, Winston. Yes, we've got a question from Prof. Springer. She asked, what is the approximate turnaround time now for an export license? I've recently sent an application to export genetic biosamples, human, from Stellenbosch University to Pasteur Institute in France.
Thank you for the question, Professor Springer. I have indeed seen your submission, and the approximate turnaround time is 21 days for a follow-up, but I have subsequently sent in a separate email alerting them that this could turnaround time of 21 days could potentially be too long, and that they should consider an expedited review of the submission. And I'm yet to receive feedback. So I think 2 weeks or 3 weeks back, we submitted an application for a department there at Tygerberg campus, and the turnaround time was about 7 days. And they then received the permit. So I would say tell your counterpart 21 days, but in the meantime, I'm working behind the scenes to perhaps get it within a week and a half. I hope that helps. Any other questions, colleagues? If not, oh, there, yes, Professor Springer, your hand is up. You may proceed.
Yes, sorry, I do have another question.
Yes.
As I said, we applied for the permit, and it's for specimens from trial participants. Now, we have specimens. There are specimens sitting in a repository in Washington, which were exported with a permit to a Washington repository with the hope that they would be analyzed. But in fact, they are quite old by now. They never managed to get the specimens analyzed, and we now feel that we could use those specimens. So the idea is, again, to use Pasteur to analyze, but first to just analyze 100 of these specimens to see if they're still viable. Now, I know that we have to get an MTA and we have to get ethics approval to move these 100 specimens from from Washington to Paris so that we can see the quality. In that case, do we need an export permit, or will the Washington repository, the people on that side, need to get the export permit?
Yeah. So we need to step back a bit in terms of the MTA that stipulated under which conditions those samples were sent to Washington, and the associated ethics approval.
Yes.
And the informed consent and all those things that stipulate what would happen to the samples.
Yes.
And once let's say that all those things are in order.
Yes.
You are not exporting anything from South Africa.
No.
It will be moved from Washington to that side. So whoever is the collaborator on that side would need to do it, but on the condition that all the other MTA ethics and things are in place for this second use of the samples.
Right.
So and I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you exactly who would be able to advise you on that. But the very first port of call would be the Health Research Ethics Committee if there's some record of the samples that, and then the MTA people within our division that could look at that initial MTA. And if that initial MTA didn't make provision, or the ethics didn't make provision for secondary use, then there could be a bit of a problem.
Understand. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that question. Okay, if there are no other questions, colleagues, I'll move on. I don't have much to say anymore, so let's see where our slides take us. Let me just click here. Right, so if you are working with or need access to restricted or regulated material, then you would need SAPRA to issue you with a department or with a permit. And here we're talking about cannabis, the use of cannabis. You are working with methamphetamine. You're working with what is the other one? Ecstasy. So in 1 year, I think it was around about 2 years back, at the end of the year, we were issued with a permit for marijuana, for ecstasy, and for tuk. So you just imagine. But luckily, this was not one person who ordered this or wanted a permit for this. And that was also facilitated through this office by making sure that you have all the paperwork. And with SAPRA, my goodness, with SAPRA, you need to have patience. And then on that patience, you have more geduld. Because it's very difficult to get hold of them. And if you get hold of them, you must make maximum use of their presence. And you need a lot of documentation and research proposals and etc. etc. But it is not a lost cause. We in this office will make sure that, again, we make sure that you have all the necessary additional supporting documents when submitting to SAPRA. So these would typically be scheduled 6 and 7 substances that you would want to use in your research, like Professor Makunga, and the application will then be facilitated through this office and follow up. We usually follow up after a week to find out how far they are in the process. I think this is about it in terms of the various permit related issuing authorities for research within the university, and that this office is, over the years, let me say that over the years, I've developed good networks with the various departments. So we are in a position to assist you. So I urge you, don't suffer in silence. Please reach out to us so that we can see how we could best support your research. I will now open the floor for questions, any additional questions that you might have. So please make use of this time to engage with me. Okay, Professor Springer, you have another question? Your hand is still up, or is it the legacy?
No, sorry, I must take that down.
Okay, wonderful.
Sorry.
Anybody else? So the golden rule: if in doubt, contact us. If you're not in doubt and if you're happy to, you may proceed. The only time when you cannot proceed is when you are submitting a TOPS permit or want a TOPS permit. They won't issue you one because the university already has one. And if you are accessing indigenous biological resources or indigenous knowledge in the country, that you would need my signature on those permit applications. Other than that, happy research, happy to consult with you, and all the best with all the activities that you're doing, and reach out to us even if you just need some advice. Thank you, colleagues.